And this is a topic too hot for even the top two podcasters won't talk about it for some reason. We have an eyewitness. We have Canon Air Force Base. We have a list of 15 people who were there, and we verified multiple people were there at the time.
When you
You
say
would
the
think
top,
that
sorry,
would make the news of the top podcast. They're afraid to talk about it. And yet they claim they're anti-corruption. And yet this is the key. This is the key that will bring the wall of corruption down. I didn't see it at first. When my film first came out and I found this footage, it's in my book at Sibrel.com. I rushed this footage I found of them faking being halfway to the moon. I was working for NBC News. I showed it to the news director. He practically fainted. He says, "Oh my gosh, this absolutely proves they didn't go to the moon." I said, "Yeah, what are we going to do?" He says, "I won't broadcast this. I'm not going to go down in history as the man who caused the next Civil War." 10 years go by, a new news director comes in, they find the footage, they call me up, they fly me to the Waldorf Astoria, put me up in the hotel, pay me thousands of dollars for the exclusive license to broadcast this footage nationwide. They're going to break the story nationwide that the moon missions are fake, and here's the proof of it. They get a call from the federal government threatening them, I think turn off their satellite or something, and they back down. And I didn't see it. I didn't think it's going to cause a civil war. I mean, I think you're overreacting. But about a month ago, I think it would bring down the corruption. Even though it killed fewer people than just, you probably know this, Richard, the JFK witness assassination list, like 200 people had
right.
accidents within a year, something outrageous. And of course, 3,000 on 9/11, and maybe 20 people were killed to cover this up, much fewer. But it's different. It's a positive lie.
The
And you're
noble lie.
taking away that candy and giving the public a big pile of manure instead. They prayed for them. They got down on their knees and they cried and they wept and they waved the flag. It was a completely unnecessary lie that they did for the same reason Clinton did his little escapade, because they could get away with it. It shows the utter arrogance. And then, mind you, I got a millionaire backing me, right? There was stuff I uncovered that I was asked not to put in a funny thing happened on the way to the moon that's in my book that you can read now at Sibrel.com, because certain people have died and they don't mind me releasing the information, including a 4-hour interview I did with the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. And she told me that he came home from work on January 26, 1967, and said the following: "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. Why is the CIA here? Never seen them here in 5 years. Why are they here now?" Very next day, the guy's dead from faulty equipment, because days earlier, he held an impromptu press conference without permission and took a bunch of reporters up to the very top of the rocket where he affixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit that his wife told me he picked from his own backyard, and said, "This thing is a lemon. This thing is a piece of junk." The CIA went to his house, confiscated all his reports he was given to a senator about how they are no way going to keep the moon schedule, and they took him out of his house without even informing his widow that he had died a few minutes earlier. They took him down, which means our tax dollars not only paid to be deceived, we paid the salaries of CIA agents and the hardware to kill our own citizens. Now, our country is founded because of the Declaration of Independence. When any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. So starting a new government is legal. It says so in our first document. They're killing their own people. I think that's destructive to life, don't you think? They're murdering Apollo astronauts to cover up the moon landing fraud. And they have these naive people sending me hate mail defending the criminals who are killing their brothers and sisters and deceiving them with their own money.
Can we go back to Eugene Akers at the Canon Air Force Base? First of all, I'm a Canadian. I don't know, where is the Canon Air Force Base?
It's in Clovis, New Mexico. Now, my father was in the Air Force, and I'd never heard of the thing. I had to look it up. It's tiny, which
Yeah.
is great. for fewer eyewitnesses. And get this, every division of the military, the Army, the Navy, Marines, Air Force, they have their intelligence division, special operations. Guess where their headquarters is?
Ah,
Canon Air Force Base. And then I remember Bill Casing, that my main source of the moon landings being fraudulent, him saying the whole thing was supervised by the United States Air Force. So there you go.
so the gentleman we see on your website, Sibrel.com, and he's talking about his father. Because Eugene was like 13 years old. He grew up I guess, on the base. His father is like involved in base security, right? His
That's
father,
right.
so his father also did a deathbed confession, but that was destroyed. Was that computer confiscated, I believe?
Yeah, basically, when I started this investigation, the the man's son, the father had already died, and the son was dying himself of cancer. So it's kind of like a double deathbed confession. And after he talked to me, I think I mentioned this. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the book or not, but I've already said it in an interview, so I can say it again. Basically, some good guys asked me to call two people on that list that I got, basically to tell them before I published the book that I have their name on a list that they were at Canon Air Force Base participating in the fake moon landing fraud. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You want me to slit my throat? But they said, trust us. So I did. I called Eugene Krantz and I called one other guy I'd never heard of. And a couple of days after I did that, my source's house was broken into. So one of these two people called the CIA and tried to put an end to this information leaking out. And then a few days after that, CIA agents showed up personally to him and threatened him face to face to kill him and his family if he ever spoke again about his father's participation in the falsification of the moon landings. This triggered a White House investigation supervised by the press secretary. It also was investigated by the United States Senate Intelligence Committee for overreach or whistleblower protection or something, and the FBI was involved to give this man whistleblower protection. And no one denied that what he said was true, because we know it to be true. We verified the people on this list were there. One of them admitted it, boasted about it in his autobiography. It was at Canon Air Force Base in June of 1968 for a classified reason. And this is a guy on the payroll of the intelligence department. And so we have this verified, and it's amazing that more people aren't making a story about this. More people, you would think, even as a curiosity. I remember, you may remember this, Richard, like 10, 20 years ago, there was a story on, one of those stories of interest, lighter side, because some curator of a museum in the Netherlands watched a funny thing happen on the way to the moon. And he thought, oh, that footage really convinced him the moon missions are fake. Well, in his museum was a rock, allegedly from the moon. In fact, Neil Armstrong said out of his own mouth, he personally picked up this rock on the moon, put it in his pocket, and saved it for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And then they immediately took it, put it in this hermetically sealed box that they presumed would never be opened. He opened it up one night by himself, put it under a microscope, and it's a piece of petrified wood. Now, unless there are trees growing on the moon, a petrified wood kind of looks weird. Is it a rock? Is it, what is it? That's why they selected it to look eerie, out of this world. So it made the news 20 years ago, a lighter side, moon rock proves to be fake. But no one wonders, okay, so if the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon missions? You see? And yet the AI is so detrimental. I mean, you could say there is a what, creation versus evolution, right? And you could say one side might be called, quote, science, although that's politicized and emotionalized as well. We're all people, right? And you could say the God of science is putting a man on the moon, right? What greater achievement of science is there? And you could say the Messiah of science would be the AI, when their own Messiah says that the moon landings are fake. That's that could convince a bunch of intellectuals that the moon missions are fake, even though a lot of them want to, believe in the glory of science. They're very pragmatic, a lot of them. And so they squashed that story to the best of their ability. And that's breaking news. Even if it, I mean, there's only two choices, right? Either Google's multi-million, billion-dollar, 10-year investment is just a piece of junk. They're so inept. Poor Google doesn't know what they're doing. It made a mistake, right? Or the moon landings were faked, right?
All
So
the
which do you think is more likely?
yeah,
Right?
all of the all of the Apollo missions to the moon shot in Clovis, New Mexico, at the Canon Air Force Base?
I don't think so. I think the first one was because they wanted it on American soil for security reasons, and they wanted it at a small base, and they wanted it at an Air Force base, and they wanted it at the Special Ops headquarters. But once people accepted that they could go to the moon and back, it was actually easier to fool people. Most of the photographic anomalies are actually in the later missions where they should have gotten better at faking it, but they actually left many more mistakes in the pictures, because once people accept it, it's very hard for them to think critically about it. It appears that some of the later missions that involved large landscapes, maybe the moon rover driving, were shot in England at an old dirigible hangar from World War II. And there were some sets that I didn't know this. The AI, recently proved that they were miniature sets. I mean, this vast landscape of the moon that looked like, half a mile across was really probably, 10, 12 feet across. And it was a miniature, that the astronaut was literally a doll. And this is what a lot of people said about the moon rover footage, that it looked like literally a remote controlled car for a number of reasons. And I couldn't quite see that, but the AI did see it. So, this is pretty interesting that the truth is coming out, and it's so shocking. There's that story of the finger out of the dike, right? I don't even know how that story begins or ends, but if you put your finger in that hole, you'll save the, dike, dam, levee from coming down. But if you take it out, start squirt just a little bit, then it gets a little bit bigger, then a few pebbles come through, then a few rocks, then a big hole you can get your hand through, and then it just crumbles away and it can't be stopped. My hope is that, and prayer, that this AI is that finger out of the dike. I mean, what more can you say? The most intelligent entity on Earth said the moon pictures are fake. No one thinks that's significant, right?